Bill Covington, Seaman First Class from Evan, North Carolina. Went in the Navy in 1944. First I went to Raleigh, North Carolina, went in, volunteered for the Navy. The day I was in Raleigh, they put me in the Navy, and the day at lunch they put me in the Marine for 2 hours. I was in the Navy Marine boat. Marine that afternoon, come back at 5 o'clock, said they didn't need me in the Marine, so I went back in the Navy. So I've served both Marines and Navy. From Raleigh I went to Camp Prairie, Virginia for 6 weeks of basic training, went home on leave for a week, went back to Newport, Rhode Island. Was signed to a new ship up there that had never gone in commission yet. And I'd done my gunner's training. I was on an anti-aircraft gun, 40 millimeter, and I spent 6 weeks up there training how to fire them, how to tear them down, rebuild them and everything. After training at Newport, we left there and went to Boston, Massachusetts, and that's where we caught the new ship. We had to they had a few people on it at that time, but we was the main crew went on it that day. We did a lot of work on it for about 4 weeks. And then we left there and went to South America for the gunner training. Did all the aircraft training and everything down there. While I was in Newport, Rhode Island, we trained on aircraft guns with pulling drones and airplanes through the air. After 2 weeks of training down in South America, we come back to Boston, Massachusetts, off the coast of North Carolina. That's where I got my first seasickness. We was in a typhoon storm off of, I believe we call them hurricanes, off the coast of North Carolina. I got real sick after 2 days, 3 nights. Then on to Boston, Massachusetts, and back into Boston Harbor there. And during that time, I come home from the Navy. I had a brother that was killed in the Navy at that time, and come home and stayed 2 weeks. Went back to Boston, Massachusetts, and we spent about a week taking on all supplies, ammunition. Just for information, it takes 11 boxcar loads of ammunition to load a ship like that. And we loaded it in one afternoon. And after getting on all supplies and everything, we left Boston, Massachusetts for the Pacific. Didn't know where we was going, but no more than to the Pacific. We left Boston, Massachusetts, went down through the Panama Canal, on to Pearl Harbor, and then joined the fleet outside of Pearl Harbor on the way up to Japan. And that was the 57th Task Force with battleships, aircraft carriers, cruisers, destroyers, and all kind of supply ships that stayed back off the front. But from the time we left Boston, Massachusetts, till I was 60 miles off the coast of Japan, was 21 days when we joined the other ships. And then from then on, it was airplanes. We were supporting, protecting the aircraft carrier was what our job was. But I'll mention later, every now and then we'd go in to do bombarding on where the troops were landed. But the aircraft carriers would send it off airplanes all morning, all day long, up till dark at night. They're going and coming. The longest time I was ever out there with the aircraft carriers, one time was 96 days, see no land, nothing but aircraft carriers and airplanes. And during that 96 days, we were supposed to stay on the gun 21 hours, and go down, sleep for 3 hours and back up there. That lasted for 96 days. Right during that time, in 96 days, we went back and supported the landing force at Ewo, all the landing crafts, and some of the battleships went in to bombard that at that time too. I guess most of you people know that was one of the worst battles it was. We were still protecting the aircraft carriers from Japanese dive bombers and the suicide bombers. The after that, we were back in the force going to Okinawa. That was some time it took place there. But the invasion of Okinawa, we went in with the landing force. One of them was on Easter Monday. Right now, I forget which one, Okinawa either one. There was some 10,000 landing crafts and ships involved in that thing. They stretched for 100 miles across when they was going into the land. Off of Okinawa, we were with the aircraft carriers. When the aircraft carrier got hit by two 500-pound bombs, of course all the aircraft was on the flight deck with bombs and things ready to take off. And of course it blew right up in a minute. That particular morning was a little bit cloudy, and the airplane the radar did not pick up the airplane coming in. It was down close to the water, and they told us to go down for breakfast. I was down deck when the thing hit. I've been down, I hadn't even got my food yet, but we went back to general quarters, and when I come up out the hatch, I could see nothing but smoke when we were about probably 1,000 feet away from the airplane. The rest of the ships all went on, and they told us to stay there and try to assist it in any way we could. Well, at first they said it had lost its power, and we were pretty close to Japan at that time, so they said we'd hook a cable to it. That's a tremendous cable, probably 6 or 8 inches in diameter. It took about 2 hours, 2 hours and a half to hook that cable. You might say, why it takes, well, we got the cable hooked, but to get the cable tight, one ship moving one way and one the other, you had to get that's a lot of weight to pull that big aircraft carrier, so we had to get it tight before we could ever take off with it. But all that happened during that, from that morning till we pulled that thing for 24 hours. And the Japanese planes come back and attacked that thing 3 more times while we had the cable hooked to it. 2 of the times, it appeared to be suicide planes. Of course, the aircraft carrier didn't have any guns that would fire. It was all on fire, and it was listing a lot of the water because they thought it was going to sink, but it didn't ever sink. But when they attacked it, there was about 6 guns on our ship. It was in the right position to fire that thing, and of course, when the guns I was on, at 40 millimeter, we fired it. It was hit and sank out there in the water. Of course, we know some from our ship hit it, but we don't know which gun, of course, hit it. Then later that day, it attacked it again, and later that afternoon, it attacked it again. But they were Japanese radios, we have contact with that all the time, and they were reporting that they had sunk a ship. But we went on, that night it was pretty breezy water, and we were having a lot of trouble trying to get that ship turned around, pulling it in the water, because, it's a big piece of aircraft carrier. But we finally got it turned. We got it within 60 miles of Japan that night, but then we got it turned and towed it back out to sea. And the next day at 1 o'clock, it got back under its own power. And it got back under its own power. And this thing fell off.
Okay, it's okay, just hold it.
It got back under its own power, and at that time, before we cut the cable loose, one more Japanese airplane come out to try to sink it, but it was shot down by our airplane, but just before it got there. So we cut the cable and it went on its way. It made its way back to New York, and later there was a movie made about that thing. But after that, we went back and joined the fleet, went back to protect, and the aircraft carrier was going up to Japan. And somewhere along there, the invasion of Okinawa took place just before that thing got hit. And later on in September that year, 45, we were off the coast of Okinawa, between Okinawa and Japan, and we had a big storm. They call them typhoons out in the Pacific. I was on a 40 millimeter quad, that's 4 guns, with 18 men on it. We went on that thing right after lunch that day with all that anti-aircraft guns, Mandy's. And we were in a storm. I was on about 35 foot off of the main deck, off of the main water. And those turrets are up in the air, but the waves are so high they could come up over top of us all night. The next morning, about 8 o'clock, they figured a way we could get down and go back to down to our compartment where we lived. I had just got down, fixing to go get him a bunk, and the turbulence racket, the bow of the ship went under one of them big waves, and 108 foot of it, all 8 decks broke off. Of course, if I'd known the thing was going to break off, I'd have stayed up there. I wouldn't have went down below deck. But we have 2 airplanes on that fantail of a ship. It tore one of them off of the caliper it sets on. That's what launches the thing. But when that fell down, it busted 2 or 3 of the gas tanks. It has 3 gas tanks. Busted one of them, gas run all down in the compartment where I live. Of course, we thought maybe something might set it off and burn up. But right after that, they called for our division to go up to the front of the ship, to the bow of it, and help move some ammunition. Well, we started up there, but we didn't ever get no further than the galley where you eat at. And of course, they shut everything down watertight. And that's where I spent the next 8 hours in there. The water was rough. You could see some of them big beams, steel beams, they were twisting. And of course, you never knew what was going to happen. But the valve, where it breaks off, all those compartments are watertight, and the crew that looks after wreckage like that kept shoring it up with big timbers and big 6x6 and timbers like that. And they finally got the water stopped about 30 foot back in the ship. During that time, after it come off, we were going backwards to try to take the pressure off the front of the ship. And we went backwards for all that night and all the next day. Finally got it shored up good. And then we went to Guam at 4 knots. That's pretty slow in the water. At Guam, they put us in a dry dock and welded a piece of steel across the front of it. And we come on back to the States. But during that time off of Okinawa, I had mentioned before, I had a good buddy from Mebane, North Carolina. Warren Burgess was with me all the time. He was on one side of the ship and I was on the other side. And of course, Warren, I see him every day or two, but sometimes he may go longer than that and I see him. But one morning early, it was a suicide plane come in. It had got hit by an aircraft fire. It was coming toward the aircraft carrier right beside, well, it was pretty close to our ship. But anyhow, it missed the aircraft carrier and landed between the aircraft carrier and our ship, right where Warren gun was at. Of course, I saw the ship and everything, airplane, but I didn't see Warren till that evening late sometime. Warren come up to me and said, Bill, I just can't stand this no longer, I got to go. I said, Warren, where are you going? You're not going nowhere. But Warren and I were good friends from the time we left here till we got back home. Warren has passed away at this time, but I'll always remember Warren. He and I in the Navy together for 2 years. And I didn't know Warren well before we left, but I got to be good friends of his and buddies with him. But after all that, we'll come back to Bremerton, Washington, where they were going to put a new bow on our ship, and we got to come home for 2 weeks from Seattle, Washington, maybe North Carolina on a train. That's a long train ride across the states with about 800 sailors on that thing. And it's from other ship beside ours. Well, that's what 800 when we left out there. Of course, it divided up and went